And we just assume that the system is calculating it correctly. And basically, the system is going to calculate it based on the way you set it up. And so we're going to go through a couple pieces there. So when you are linking assessments, you want to make sure that you've got a rubric created for that assessment, that you link the rubric to the assessment, and then that you link the assessment to the grade items. And you want to make sure that you've kind of paid attention to how you're actually setting up those weightings. So I'm going to, oops, I totally was on the wrong spot. So we're going to, talk about the weighting piece first before I get into that next part. So when we're adding in grade items, what we want to do is actually think about the weight that we're providing to things and then provide the appropriate links. So when you're creating a grade item, you might not always want to use rubrics. One of the pieces about the grades tool is the grades tool doesn't allow you to add in from an assessment. So from, say, a discussion that you're assessing or evaluating, or from a quiz that you're assessing and evaluating, or from the assignment that you're assessing and evaluating, doesn't allow you to add in multiple categories from that screen. You're going to have to do that through the grades tool. So because you're going to be entering in things through the grades tool, you want to make sure that you think about the approach that you're taking. The rubric you can set up by multiple categories. So you could have a rubric with a knowledge component and an inquiry component and an application component. When you're entering the grades, though, in any of those tools, it only allows you to enter in a single grade. You then have to go into the grades tool to enter in the other categories. So something to be thinking about. The other one is just to pay attention to the error messages that you may see, because those error messages may not actually be a concern, but it's something that's being flagged for you. So it's something you want to pay attention to. And then lastly, remember that your weightings in your categories may actually be determined or identified by your board or department. So make sure that you're clear on who actually gets to decide what the weightings are for your categories before you get started. So when we're talking about the math, here's kind of an example of what we sometimes see. So within the term, the educator wanted knowledge, inquiry, communication, and application to be weighted at 40, 30, 20, and 10. And so when they create their categories, that's what they entered the weight in, because that was their 70%. But keeping in mind that at the end of the term, you've got your 30% that you need to do with final evaluations. If you then just go in and add in a final exam and a final culminating task of 15 and 15, the weightings actually get skewed. They're not quite right. And you can see the actual weight there. Essentially what a weight is, at the end of the day, a weight is just a recalculation of the mark. So if I have knowledge being 40, what it's basically doing is converting whatever mark is inside of knowledge into a mark out of 40. Similarly, inquiry, a mark out of 30, 20, 10, and 15, 15. And as you can see there, because the grand total there is larger than 100, the actual weight or the contribution of each of those categories to the grade is slightly skewed. And so you want to be thinking about how do you actually set up those weights so that they're actually going to total 100. So what we would want to do is, if what I would like is during my term work, 40, 30, 20, 10 to be the distribution, and then that become the 70%, and adding in my final 30 summative evaluation or evaluations, what I need to do then is I need to actually think about that out of 100. So what I want to do is take 40% of 100, or set the weight to be 28. I want to make 30% of 100 be the weight for inquiry, so that would be 21. And so on and so forth. What that allows me to do is actually identify how much is counting for the 70, and then I can put in my final 30% as a fraction or a breakdown of 30, whether it's 15, 15 or 10, 20 or 5, 25. I can then break it down, or I could put it just as 30, and everything's going to work out properly. So I want to be thinking about how I actually create those category weights and make sure that they actually add up to what I'm looking for them to add up to. So we do have some resources about how you can add a quiz as a grade item, or an assignment as a grade item, and assessing and evaluating with expectations. I want to show you just really quickly within the grades tool how I can create an item manually inside of the grades tool. So there's two ways that I can create grade items. I can create grade items within the grades tool itself, or I can link something that I'm doing to a grade item or create it on the fly. And so here I am inside of the grades tool. And you'll notice that I've got these warnings up here, right? It says knowledge adds up right now to 10%, not 100, and to make sure that all of my weights add up to 100. Why that's giving me this message is because inside my setup, I've added something to knowledge, but the weight inside the thing inside of knowledge right now is not adding up to 100% because I only have a single item that I've created there. Similarly, in my other categories, I don't have anything in there. And so that's why it's giving me this warning about 0%. This isn't a problem yet because I know what I'm working on right now, and I know that I'm building these things out as my course goes on. However, if at the end of the course you still have those warnings, and if at the end of the course you are setting your weights to reflect what it should be worth out of that category. So in my practice, I approach this a little differently than the way Carrie explained it. Carrie described a scenario where you had one assessment that was out of 50, and then something else that was supposed to be more valuable, but it was only out of 10. In my practice, I would have actually had the thing that's more valuable out of a larger grade so that it was counting for a larger proportion of the mark. In Carrie's scenario, though, she needs to play with the weightings in order to ensure that that thing that was out of 50 marks doesn't count for as much as the thing out of 10 marks. For me, in my practice, what I would do is I would have those weighted by the points they were out of, being reflective of their importance or value to the category. And so for me, I never played around with weightings inside. In my gradebook then, my knowledge would always give me this error that it wasn't adding up to 100, but because I had actually allocated the marks based on the importance in my course, I wasn't worried about that. So those little flags are there, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. You want to just be paying attention to what it's actually saying to you. So when you create a grade item, what you're going to do is go to Manage Grades and then select New and create a new item. So when I create that new item, I have a couple choices. I could do a numeric, so that is obviously self-explanatory. However, I also have the select box, and this one kind of relates to what Carrie was talking about with a grade scheme. So one of the things that I did was I set up a grade scheme so that I have the ability to add in a grade based on rubric level. So I'm just going to create an item called rubric level example. I'm going to put it into the knowledge category. I'm going to say this could be an assignment that I wanted to be a certain weight, right? So I'm still going to have to give it a mark. So let's say that I make it a mark of 20, but I give it a weight of 10. What that's going to do then is it's going to take that mark out of 20 and actually convert it into a mark out of 10. That's how it's going to process it. In terms of the grade scheme, I want to use my rubric levels. And I'm just going to save that so you can see what happens. So there's my sample activity. If I now want to enter grades, I can hit enter grades for that activity. A little spreadsheet will come up. I only have one student in here. And what I can actually do is drop this down and then select a level, if that's how I'm choosing to do it. When I do that, what it's going to do is use my grade scheme where I've identified what is the value of a level 4. And I looked at the achievement chart from Growing Success and identified the mid value in each of those ranges within 4+ down to 1-. I identified the middle value as the percentage that you get. So when I click on level 4, you will get a very specific percentage of 100. And so it's now taken that and actually put that into the mark for the student. I can now save and close that. And so that now is in for that particular activity. I now have a grade in there for that rubric level grade. This subtotal is looking at the grand total of marks that I've assigned so far. So I happen to have 2 activities. And so that's why the subtotal is giving you something out of 28. So I can create manually that. I can also create a new entry, again, by going to Manage Grades, creating new item. I can also create one that's numeric. So this would be just if I wanted to type in a numeric value. Again, whatever it's out of and whatever I want it to be worth in terms of weight. And then I can now, within that item, Oops, I did not put it into a category, so let's get it into a category. If you don't put things into categories, they kind of sit outside of it. You can actually save things without them being within a category. So I'm going to put that into my thinking and inquiry. So there you can see it's in my thinking and inquiry. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to enter a value for this. So again, if I haven't attached it to anything, but I just want to enter in a mark, I can go to having a moment with my mouse. I can go to enter grades. And then same thing, I can type in a value out of 15 and save that. And then save and close. So you can see, if I look at this thinking and inquiry, the activity was out of 15, but I said that thinking and inquiry was weighted at 21. And so what it's done is converted 10 out of 15 into a mark out of 21. So it's converted the fraction basically. Each of those fractions will then add up to the 100% by the end of the course. And that's how the final grade is then calculated. So one way I can do things is by manually creating those grades. A second way that I can do that is to link in assessments, which I started to speak to and then realized I was on the wrong slide. So when you've got an assessment, you can also provide a rubric for it. You can link that rubric to the assessment, and then if you link the assessment to the grade item, it becomes visible to the students. For some items, for example, for assignments, you don't need it to be linked to the grade book in order for the students to be able to see it. But for other activities, in order for the students to be able to see your feedback and comments, you actually have to create a grade item and link it back to the grades tool in order for it to be visible for them. So that's why it's good practice, if you're going to be using the grades tool, link everything into there, and then that way it's all visible to the students. So when we're doing that, we're going to kind of look at how you can do these links through various tools. And here we go. Let me show you how that looks. So within my course, I've got an assignment. That's where I'm going to start. So I've created these assignments. I can actually go in and edit the assignment just because when I was creating it, I didn't do the linking. So this is me wanting to link something after the fact. What I can actually do in my assignment when I'm creating it is I can create a mark of what it's out of. So let's say I want it to be out of 5. I can attach it to a grade item. So for example, maybe it's out of 5, but I want to use that rubric grade item that I made. That's actually related to this activity. I can actually link it to that. I can add in my rubric. So there's my rubric, and I can now save and close. So now that I've done that, when I go into mark the student work, and I've got some sample work already in here. So when I'm coming in to assess and evaluate, I can give them a score. So here I use my rubric. I said that they got a level 3. So I can record that then as a level 3. And you can see that it's given them the appropriate mark out of 5 based on what I've said a level 3 is worth. And that was because the grade item that I chose was one that was based on this rubric scale, as opposed to typing in a mark manually. If I don't create it ahead of time, so looking at another assignment, I can also just simply create an assignment. So I'm just going to go into assignments, make a new one really quickly. When I make that assignment, I can say what I want it to be out of. So maybe this is out of 15. And I want to now link this to my grade book. I haven't created an item in the grade book yet. I actually want the fact that I'm making the assignment right now to actually create the grade item as well. So I'm going to select new grade item. I've got a choice. Do I want it to be numeric, or do I want it to be that drop down of levels? This time I'm going to ask that it's numeric. I'm going to give it a name. And so it allows me to create a name other than what the assignment's called, or I can call it whatever I've called the assignment. And depending on your practice, one or the other might make more sense to you. So I'm going to put this under the thinking and inquiry category. I'm going to say that the maximum points are out of 15, and I want the weight to be out of 10. So again, it's going to take that mark out of 15 and convert it into a mark out of 10. I'm going to save that. And so here you can see I've got the assignment set up. I'm just going to save and close that and then flip over to the grades tool so you can see what it's done. So in the grades tool, if I go into manage grades, you'll see that here's my sample assignment, and it's connected to an actual assignment in the assignment folder. And it's a numeric value out of 10 with a weight out of 15 with a weight out of 10. So again, it's going to take these marks and just really trying to hammer home how the calculations work. For each of these assignments, it's out of 15, but the system's going to convert that into a mark out of 10. It's going to add those two together. So now I have a mark out of 20 and convert that into an overall mark out of 21. So it's basically rolling up the things inside the category into a grand total of 21 points that get added all together to give you your 100% for your course. So if I change these weightings around, if I made the top one weighted out of 5, now all of a sudden it's converting that mark out of 15 into a mark out of 5, adding up that mark out of 5 with that mark out of 10, and then converting all that into a mark out of 21. So again, it's really working on converting things into whatever you said the weight was, and then converting those weighted things into a total out of the weight for your category. So if I'm working in something else, like say the discussion forum, so I'm just going to go and create a discussion really quickly. Only if I can find where I'm looking for it. Discussions, there we go. I'm going to create a discussion. So I happen to have this discussion forum that I've already created. I'm going to edit this for a sec. If I want to assess and evaluate this particular discussion forum, I can do that by, again, either choosing a grade item or making one. So I'm going to make one. I'm going to put it into a category. And I'm going to say what it's out of. So maybe this is out of 20. I'm going to make the weight out of 5. And so I'm going to give it a score out of 20. And again, I can add a rubric. If when I do this, I don't actually give it a grade and tie it to the grade book, the students won't be able to see my feedback. Discussion forums are an example of a spot where when you're trying to assess the student work, if you haven't tied it to the grade book, they're not actually able to see the feedback from your assessment of what they did. One of the other pieces when I'm assessing a discussion forum is I have the ability to choose that I want to evaluate or assess the individual posts. So if they post and then reply, I can assess and evaluate each one, or I can just assess and evaluate the whole thing as a summative kind of evaluation. If I choose to assess individual posts, then I get to choose how it decides out of each of those posts that I give it a grade, a mark, what exactly is it going to record as the overall achievement for that discussion topic? Is it going to use the average, the max, the min, the sum, or the mode? And again, you get to choose which method is used to get that overall. You're not able to override that calculation. So just a word of caution, if you're going to do that, if you're going to set that it does it by taking all of your grades and doing something with it for that topic that it records in the grade book, once you set that, you're not actually able to override it. So if you all of a sudden disagree with it being the mode for that particular student, you can't override that grade because it's tied to the calculation. So I usually actually just leave that off and choose to assess and evaluate everything, their posts and responses, as one holistic representation of how they've done in this particular ant and grasshopper discussion post. So again, when I save and close that, if I look at my grades tool, and just look at the manage grades section, I can see that I've got the ant and grasshopper. It's tied to a discussion. It's out of 20. And I've got the option of a weight of 5. Now, when I'm entering in grades for the students, I can look at it in this view here, where it looks like a bit of a spreadsheet and I can scroll across. I also, though, have the option of clicking on the student's name. And sometimes this is helpful when you're marking a number of things. In this case, what I then am able to do is simply drop down and see for this particular student. So this is my test student that I'm marking, that I actually have options here for each of their assignments. And I can then go in and provide the grades. This, for some people, works as a nicer way for entering the grades for a given student, as opposed to trying to enter in for the class and scrolling across that spreadsheet view. So if that works for you, and it's also quite helpful at the end when you're trying to review student performance to be able to kind of see everything in a nice kind of long scroll, as opposed to having to scroll across left to right across the screen. It's sometimes hard to see exactly what you have assessed or evaluated for that particular student. So I'm just going to save that so I can get out of this screen. And so now that I have assignments and activities in, I can start to see how it's doing those subtotals. Again, remember that the mark that it's out of here, the reason it's saying it's out of 21 is because I made the thinking and inquiry category worth 21. I made the knowledge category worth 28 because that's how I'm going to get to 100% by the end of all of it. So that's where it's kind of working. And you'll notice that, remember, I had messed around with the weightings of things. So right now the weighting inside my category of thinking and inquiry only totals 20 and not 100. So the system is giving me a warning that, you know, I haven't yet made things worth the right amounts for it to actually be worth the weight that I thought it was. If the weight was supposed to represent a percentage, right now it's not doing that because all of those weights don't add up to 100. Once all the weights add up to 100, then those weights would represent a percentage. Until then, it's just I've converted it into a new fraction. That's all I've effectively done. So I'm going to stop that part and just look at, just provide an opportunity. Carrie, were there any questions that I didn't address?
I don't think so, Paul. There were lots of questions coming in about having a single assignment under multiple categories.
Right.
And we always get those. And again, so every single grade item can only have 1 mark. So if you are using a rubric, it does become a little bit problematic.
Yeah, why don't I show that, Carrie?
Perfect. Yeah, can you? That would be great.
Yeah, for sure. So if I've made, if I've done an assignment where I've got a rubric that I'm using to actually record results, what you're going to be doing is, because you're recording against multiple categories, within my assignment, I can create an assignment folder. So sorry, first of all, let's just start at the rubric. We'll start right at the very beginning. So if I create a rubric, one of the things that I can do to keep my life kind of nice and straightforward is I can actually create a rubric here that has the different categories in them. So this could be my, I'm just going to add in an extra category here. So category group. So this could be my knowledge component. This could be my inquiry component of my rubric. I then have my descriptions and my descriptors for the levels, right? So what am I assessing and evaluating, and what does each of the levels represent? So I've created this. Let's see if the system will let me actually save it. So this is one way that I can save it. So I've got these untitled rubrics. So then when I'm marking and creating my assignment, I absolutely can create an assignment where I then attach that rubric that I just created. And I'm just double checking. Yep, that was the one. So it's this one. So I'm going to attach that rubric. So I've now got that rubric attached. Notice that I haven't given it a grade item, haven't given it a score. So I'm saving and closing that. When I then go in to assess or evaluate that activity, and I'm just going to, so that you can see what the assessment or evaluation looks like, I'm just popping in there. So here I am inside. You'll notice there is no spot for me to put a grade. I do have the rubric, and I can use the rubric to provide feedback on each of the criteria, the knowledge and the inquiry sections. I would need to keep track of what level I've assigned to those two pieces. I'm going to need to do it somewhere other than here because I'm not able to record it on this rubric for each category. I can record how they've done in each of the areas, but in order to say like your knowledge was a 3+, but your inquiry was only a 3, I need to jot that down somewhere. So I may choose to put that here. But again, I need to have it on paper somewhere for me to be able to transfer that to the grades tool. Because once I've got that here, then what I can actually do is go into my grades tool. So I'm just going to publish that for the students. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. So this is way number 1. So I've now created the assignment, I've assessed and evaluated, and I need to enter these grades in. So what I'm going to do is create a new grade item. It's going to be based on a select box. It is multiple category assignment, and I'm going to do the knowledge component out of 10 in the knowledge category. And I'm going to make a second one, also a select box, multiple category assignment inquiry. So if this was like my mitosis lab, then I would call this mitosis lab knowledge, mitosis lab inquiry. Again, I'm going to make it out of a certain number of points, certain weight, and I'm going to put this one into my think and inquiry category and make sure that I've done the rubric levels as my dropdown. So now I've got them. And if I want to now enter in grades for them, when I go to the enter grades section, I should, let's just see. That's not going to do what I want. When I go into the grade section, then what I'm going to do is scroll across. Here's my one activity. And I said, oops, I chose the wrong scale. So that would be my 3+. And then here is my other one where I say they get a 3. So I've now scored those, and I can then save that for the student. And because I'm in the spreadsheet view right now, when I go in, that's automatically saving as I go from one box to the next. So that's one way to do it. Second way to do it, which is helpful because it doesn't require you to remember the rubrics, is you could actually create a separate rubric for each of your categories. So you could make a knowledge rubric. You could also make a inquiry rubric. So instead of doing it all in one rubric, I've actually made 2 rubrics now. And so when I create the assignment, so multiple categories, way number 2. When I create the assignment, again, I'm going to attach a rubric. I'm choosing the 2 rubrics that I used. So there's my knowledge rubric and my inquiry rubric. I'm again not giving it a grade item because when I give it a grade item, that automatically only puts in 1 mark. I need to keep track of multiple marks. So I can save and close that. So there I've got my multiple categories 2 ways. And we acknowledge the fact that neither of these are ideal solutions. It's a deficit right now, unfortunately, of the VLE that we're not able to actually record multiple marks for one assignment. It's something we've brought up with our vendor a number of times and are hoping to eventually see some improvement on. So here's my here's my inquiry rubric. So I might look at that and say, okay, that's overall a level 3. And then here on the knowledge rubric, I can give them, let's say they got level 4s across the board, I could give it a level 4. So there I've got now my levels recorded. What it does for me is it provides me with the opportunity to not have to remember which levels I'm giving as I'm giving my feedback. I could be typing in my feedback and then I can quickly look back here to see what overall level was achieved. Because I use different rubrics for each category, I can put an overall level for those categories. And when you're creating those rubrics, it's possible for you to actually add in more levels for the overall than you have for the actual rubric. So what I like to do when I use a rubric like this is my categories here are just 4, 3, 2, 1. But what I actually put in here are the pluses and minuses. So I would actually build this out so that I can have 4 plus, 4, 4 minus, 3 plus, 3, etc. Because then I can look here and say, okay, I gave a bunch of 3s and a 4. I'm calling that a 3 plus, or I'm calling that a 4 minus. So it allows me to kind of use the broader buckets to assess and evaluate the ideas, and then actually do the analysis about, is that a plus or a minus based on how many did you get above, how many did you get below, and what's my professional judgment there. Carrie, were there other questions?
No, that was really the biggest one, Paul. And then I know people are really interested in having, you know, rubrics with multiple categories feeding into the grades tool, and lots of requests for that sort of in the back end. But
For sure. And it's definitely something that, again, we've brought up with the vendor a few times and they know is very important to us. So we wait with bated breath.
so that does bring us to the end of our presentation, everyone. And as we mentioned before, we will definitely stick around. So if you have specific questions, go ahead and post those in the Q&A pod, and Paul and I will do our best to answer them. As we mentioned, the session will be recorded. Unfortunately, the opening part of it was missed, but hopefully this setup wizard, we have included sort of step-by-steps, as well as the creating the new categories. The more complicated part that Paul was speaking about is part of the recording. So that will be posted and shared out to everyone with the slide deck. So I think on that note, we will just leave it, and we will say thank you so much for joining us today. But again, we will stick around for the next little bit to answer any questions that you have. And if you are heading out, good luck. Hopefully all of the resources that we mentioned today and the session will help guide you in setting up the grades tool for summer school. So thank you again, and we will stick around and just answer questions in the Q&A pod.